If you've ever camped deep in the Appalachian Mountains, you know the silence out there can feel wrong. One minute it's crickets and crackling firewood. The next, it's nothing. No birds, no wind, just the slow realization that something might be watching. In tonight's video, we're diving into 9 true camping trips that started off peaceful and ended in absolute nightmare fuel. These are real accounts from real people who thought they were alone in the woods. If you love horror, hit that like button. It helps this story reach more fans like you. Comment where you're watching from. Every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family is tuning in. And tell me which of these 9 stories stuck with you the most. Subscribe to support Creepy Souls, and stay scared. It was supposed to be a simple weekend, just 3 of us, a river bend, and the sound of nothing but wind and water. Jared had planned the trip months ago. Him, me, and Trevor, all high school friends turned tired adults, trying to recapture something we probably never really had. We parked down by the old forestry gate near Laurel Run, shouldered our packs, and followed the worn path upriver. It was all routine. Camp markers every half mile, the faint smell of wood rot and pine needles, muddy stones underfoot. By late morning, we had planned to be setting up near the riverbank, but that's when Jared pulled out the topo map. He said there was a shortcut, a faint trail that curved up the ridge and cut across to the next bend. Shaves an hour, he claimed. It's marked here, but not on the new apps. It didn't look like a trail, just a tight line between tree clusters, but we followed him. We always followed Jared. It climbed higher than I expected. The air thinned a bit, more lichen on the trees, and the ground turned soft, like it had been rained on days before and never dried. A strange silence settled in, too. No bugs, no wind. Just our boots squishing through leaf mold and the occasional snap of a branch behind us, never in front. We walked for hours, past dead stumps, a collapsed fence, and something that might have once been a fire pit, blackened stones half swallowed by the earth. I kept checking for blaze marks on the trees, but saw nothing. No ribbons, no markers, no sign anyone had used this trail in decades. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, we knew we'd lost the main trail. Trevor tried to hide his worry, but he kept glancing over his shoulder. We set up camp in a flat patch near a cluster of leaning spruce trees. Jared stayed chipper, boiling water, setting up his tarp like everything was fine. But that night, something walked the perimeter, slow steps circling us. Not running, not curious, pacing. We killed the fire around midnight and sat up, half asleep with our backs to each other, trying to act like we didn't hear it. The footsteps would stop when we made noise, but start again minutes later, always just beyond the tree line, always moving in a wide loop. I kept telling myself it was a deer, or maybe a bear, cautious of the fire, but it wasn't skittish. It never wandered off. It just kept circling. By first light, we were already packing, but when we looked back at the clearing, there were no boot prints behind us. No crushed leaves. No scuff marks from where we set the stove, or where Trevor tripped the night before. The trail we'd followed, whatever faint path we thought we saw, was gone. Just moss, trees, and silence. We walked for hours that second day, south, or at least we thought it was south. Jared's compass spun a few times before it settled, and even then the direction felt wrong. The trees didn't match the map anymore. The valleys dropped where they shouldn't. The ridge bent in strange ways, doubling back on itself. We found an old hunter's blind around mid-morning, rotting and half-collapsed into a tree trunk. A good sign, Jared said. Meant people had been here. But the plywood was gray and splintered, the kind that flakes like ash when you press it. There were no trails leading to it. No shell casings. No boot prints. Trevor started muttering around noon. Not full sentences, just things like, "This ain't how moss grows," or "That tree's got the same notch again." Like he'd seen something repeat. I didn't know how to respond, so I kept pushing forward. The fog rolled in around 3. Real thick. The kind that hangs low, doesn't swirl, just sits in your lungs. We stopped for water near a rock face where water trickled out from between stones, cold and clear. We filled our bottles, and that's when Trevor found the carving. It was low on the stone. Shallow scratches, weathered but legible. "Don't double back." Jared laughed it off. Said people leave weird warnings all the time in the woods. But I noticed how fast he packed up after that. We didn't talk much after that night. We didn't set up camp. Just sat near a dry patch under a massive spruce, passing around jerky and whispering every few minutes. Did you hear that? Something was still pacing us. Never closer, never farther. Just at the edge and as if it knew our radius. Our limits. Trevor didn't sleep. I know because I saw his eyes catch the moonlight every time I stirred. At dawn, he was gone. No sound. No rustling. Just his pack still zipped, boots gone, one sock hanging from a low branch like it got caught mid-step. Jared lost it. He screamed his name into the trees until his voice cracked. I tried to track Trevor's direction, but again, no prints. No bent branches. No path out. The woods were flat there, soft underfoot. Our own prints from last night, already gone. We wandered until the sun was directly overhead, and then the clouds rolled in again. This time darker. Lower. Like the sky had sunk down to meet us. We finally found a sign of something human late that evening. A rusted bit of barbed wire caught in a tree's bark, and beyond it, a collapsed structure. Looked like a root cellar, built into the hillside, mostly caved in. We ducked inside just to get dry from the mist. There was something inside, not a person. Not a body, just an old rucksack. And inside the rucksack, a topo map. Same kind Jared had, same trail marked in pencil, but the paper was soaked through. Mold crusted the edges. The ridgeline was circled, and next to it, scrawled in the corner, trail only goes one way. Jared folded it up, stared at it and whispered, "We need to go back." But when we turned around to leave the cellar, the light outside had changed, dimmer, greener somehow, like the woods had shifted while we weren't watching. I don't remember walking out. I just remember stumbling into noise, people, cars. We came out near a trailhead 6 miles north of where we started. A ranger asked us where we'd been. Jared tried to explain, but when he showed the topo map, the ranger shook his head. Those haven't been printed since the 80s. Trevor was never found. We filed reports. They searched the ridge for days. Dogs wouldn't go past a certain elevation, said the ground was too soft, like it was hiding something. That was 2 years ago. I still dream of footsteps at night, and sometimes, when I drive through that part of the range, my GPS glitches. The ridge flashes on screen for a second, that same tight line where no trail should be, the shortcut that never comes back. After the breakup, I didn't want advice, didn't want a drink, didn't want to talk it out with friends who meant well but had never really been alone. So I packed up my gear and drove east, past Boone, past Blowing Rock, deep into the folds of the Appalachians where the roads narrow and the map gets stingy with names. There's a spot I remembered from when I was a kid. My uncle used to take me hiking out there, up a long deer trail past a mossy creek over a ridgeline with switchbacks carved into shale, and finally to this old rock formation. Locals called it Bear's Back, though I never saw anything that looked like a bear. It was just a massive overhang, about 10 feet high, maybe 20 wide, with a sloped rock wall behind it, shelter from rain. Quiet. I wanted quiet. I parked where the road turned to gravel and hiked in by memory. The air was thick from recent rain. You could smell the soaked bark, the mulch underfoot, the faint iron scent of wet stone. The leaves were already turning. Golden rust and that dark red you only see in these hills. I reached Bear's Back by late afternoon. It was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just bigger. The overhang jutted out over a flat slab where water had worn the rock smooth. The back wall was damp, cool to the touch, slick with algae in places, but dry enough to set up camp. There was no one else out there. No tire tracks, no wrappers or beer cans, just quiet, and not the kind that makes you relax, the kind that makes your ears ring from the absence of anything else. No bird calls, no wind in the trees, no bugs, just stillness. While clearing space for my stove, I noticed a crevice near the wall, low and narrow, hidden behind a pile of fallen needles and broken branches. Something metallic caught the light. I dug gently with my boot, then reached in. Rusty cookware, a bent mess tin, a corroded spoon fused to the bottom of what might have been a pan, and deeper in, a sleeping bag, or what was left of one. The fabric peeled apart like wet paper, stained, molded. I set it aside without thinking too much. Maybe a hunter, maybe a squatter, maybe some kid playing survival years ago. Nothing alarming, just old, forgotten. I laid out my mat, boiled some rice, and watched the sun burn out behind the ridge. The fire flickered soft against the rock face. I listened. Still no crickets, no owls, just the pop of damp wood and the occasional drip from the overhang above me. I woke up sometime after midnight. At first, I wasn't sure why. I wasn't cold. The fire had burned low but was still glowing. But something had changed. Breathing, not mine, slow, heavy, right behind me, but I was already backed against the rock. The wall was inches from my head. There was no gap, no space. Just solid, cold stone, but I swear, and something was breathing. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just lay there, eyes wide, pulse thumping in my neck like it wanted out. The breathing didn't stop. Didn't fade. Eventually, I must have passed out. I woke at first light, covered in a cold sweat. The fire had gone out, and the forest was still eerily quiet. No rustle, no chirp, nothing. I sat up slowly, expecting to see something, but there was no one. No footprints. No sign anyone had come near. The rock wall behind me was slick with dew, but undisturbed. I ran my fingers across it. Cold. Solid. I told myself it had to be a dream. That the silence and isolation had gotten into my head. That people hear things in the dark. Still, I packed up quickly. The air felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath. I thought about hiking back out. Thought about just leaving. But something kept me there, maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe something else. I told myself I'd stay one more night, then leave at dawn. Mid-morning, I decided to explore up the ridge. There used to be a firewatch path, barely more than a game trail now, that led toward an old overlook. The woods were overgrown, damp with fog that clung to your clothes and made the ground feel soft and uncertain. Half a mile up, I saw something off the trail, a mound, subtle, natural-looking from a distance, but there was a square edge to it, man-made. I brushed aside leaves and found the edge of a tarp, rotting but still there. Underneath, more gear, a frame pack. Military surplus probably, torn at the seams. A canteen with holes punched clean through it. A boot, split open at the sole like it had been forced off. And a journal. Just a few pages still dry enough to read. The rest had fused into a solid block of pulp. Most of it was scratched in jagged letters. Unsteady. Like whoever wrote it had a shaking hand. Stayed near the stone again. Still nothing. Heard breathing last night. No one there. I moved the bag. Something moved it back. No animals. Not even ants. Can't tell if the sound is in the rock or behind it. I think it's still in there. That was the last legible line. The rest was water damage and mold. I left the journal under the tarp and hiked back down. I didn't stay the second night. I packed fast. Didn't eat. Didn't speak aloud. I kept expecting to hear it again. That breathing. But the woods stayed silent. As I left Bear's back, I glanced once more at the rock wall, the same one I'd slept against. There were marks on it I hadn't noticed before, near where my head had been. Long, shallow scrapes like fingernails, like something had tried to dig through or tried to reach out. I don't know what happened there. Don't want to, I've never been back, but sometimes, when I'm half asleep in my apartment with the window cracked, and the wind shifts just right, I swear I hear it again. That slow, deliberate breathing, not in my room, but just behind the wall, and I lie still, just in case. We weren't supposed to be out that far, not really. The ranger station at Ridgetop had warned about flash flooding, and the trails past the old power lines hadn't been maintained in years. But Tyler swore he knew a spot, something his cousin told him about. A quiet little shelf beside a stream, just deep enough for fishing and far enough off the main trail to feel like a real escape. We hiked in late afternoon. Fog had started settling low along the valleys, not thick but enough to mute the woods. Leaves slick underfoot, the smell of wet pine and earth heavy in the air. The trail was mostly deer path past the switchback, barely visible. I remember stepping over a dead raccoon on the way up, bloated, stiff, and silent. No flies, no smell, just wrong. By dusk, we reached the spot. Tyler grinned like he'd uncovered gold. The stream curved into a half circle around a bed of rock and moss, framed by rhododendron and thick roots clawing down from the ridge above. Locals called it Drowning Creek. Tyler thought the name was funny. I didn't. We set up near a flat stone that jutted out like a natural bench. Someone had built a crude fire ring nearby, half buried in leaves, old char still dusting the rocks. I asked how long ago his cousin had camped there. Tyler just shrugged. He didn't. He said his dad used to back in the day. That night, the air turned colder than expected. I bundled into my bag early, listening to the creek flow soft over rocks. Tyler stayed up, poking the fire and sipping from his flask. Around midnight, I heard him shift, then stop. Silence, then a whistle, off-key, slow, coming from upstream. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't far either. Maybe 30 yards, just out of sight around the bend. It sounded like someone whistling a tune they'd long forgotten the melody to. Wandering in and out of key, it paced. You could hear it move. 6 or 7 steps one way, pause, then back again. Back and forth, like someone pacing on wet leaves. I sat up and asked if he heard it. He nodded but didn't say anything. We listened for a long time. It never got closer, never got louder, just stayed there. Tyler eventually killed the fire and crawled into his tent. Neither of us slept much. When I opened my eyes again, it was just before dawn. Pale blue light filtered through the canopy. Fog clung to the stream like a sleeping dog. I went to wash my face and nearly stepped on it. A boot, sitting dead center in the shallow creek. Not buried, not wedged, just there like it had been placed, worn. Mismatched laces. Mud-crusted toe. It didn't belong to either of us. I called Tyler over. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared, then without a word stepped into the water and flipped the boot with a stick. Empty. That's when I noticed the rock beneath it. Flat. Wide. Smooth as slate. And under the water, pressed against the underside of that stone, a handprint, not carved, not painted, pressed pale, splayed wide. The fingers distorted slightly by the water, but there. Human. Real. I knelt, reached in slowly. The stone was cold, slippery. But when I ran my hand beneath it, nothing, no crevice, no pocket, just rock. The print was gone. The boot stayed there. We didn't touch it again. Neither of us spoke on the hike out. A week passed before I spoke about it. Tyler wouldn't return my calls. Wouldn't text. When I finally went by his apartment in Asheville, his roommate said he'd packed up and left, didn't say where. Just took his gear and disappeared. I couldn't shake the image of the boot, of the hand under the rock, of that whistle pacing just beyond the bend. Something about it scratched at the edges of my memory. Something I couldn't place, so I went back. Alone, I left early, took the same trail. The fog returned the moment I crossed the power lines. That same heavy quiet, same damp, clinging air. I reached the creek by early afternoon. Nothing had changed. Fire ring still there. The flat rock still dry and warm in the weak sun. The boot was gone, but the water was lower now. I could see more of the creek bed. Stones worn down to bone-smooth ovals. A few beer tabs glinting near the bank. Nothing strange. Not until I checked under the same rock. No handprint, but etched into the moss nearby, low, almost missed it, was a single line. A scratch, like from a knife or sharp stone. Worn, almost grown over again, it read, "He stayed too long." That night I camped farther uphill. I couldn't bring myself to sleep beside the creek, even with the silence, especially because of the silence. At some point in the night I heard the whistle again. Off-key. Coming from downstream this time. Slower than before. Less like pacing, more like dragging. I stayed frozen in my bag. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe hard. Just listened. It lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then silence. In the morning, the fog was so thick I could barely see my boots. I packed fast. I didn't check the stream. Didn't go near the rock. But on the way out, maybe a quarter mile from the site, I passed an old man on the trail. Gray beard. Canvas jacket. Mud-stained pants. Looked like he'd stepped out of the forest itself. He didn't stop me, just nodded. But as I passed, I caught what he was humming under his breath. Off-key. Slow. Same tune. I didn't look back. I don't go into the woods much anymore. Not alone. Not even in places I used to know. Sometimes I'll be walking near the river that runs behind my apartment, and I'll hear it again. That whistle, faint and unsteady, floating over the water. And once, just once, I found a single boot sitting by the edge. Not mine. Not anyone I knew. I left it there. I don't fish anymore either. I'd been needing space, not in the vague, overused sense, but in the literal get me out of this town before I do something I regret kind of way. The past few months had been heavy. My mom's health turning again. A breakup that dug deeper than I expected. Too many questions. Not enough answers. So I loaded the pack, grabbed the old tent, and headed east. Roan Mountain. Just south of the state line. Quiet, high, and best of all isolated. I wasn't after any great hike. I just wanted to get above the noise. A few miles in from Carver's Gap, I veered off the main trail, following a ridge that curved behind a slope of spruce and rhododendron. A wide patch opened up with a soft floor of pine needles, and a slight downward slope where runoff had carved a narrow rut. The fog was already rolling in, cold and slow, like someone dragging a wet sheet across the forest. Perfect spot to camp. I pitched the tent quick, then started boiling water for some ramen. I remember checking the time, around 6:15, and placing my flashlight next to the stove just in case it got dark fast. It was one of those heavy metal ones, scratched from years of glove box storage. I hadn't used it all day. That's when I heard it. "Hey, you dropped something." It came from up in the trees, maybe 20 yards uphill. A man's voice, mid-range, calm, not panicked. Just matter of fact. I stood up, heart already kicking into gear, and called back. "What? Hello?" No answer. The woods were quiet, not silent. The kind of quiet where you can still hear the wind brushing leaves, far-off tree frogs. But still. I climbed a few feet up toward the direction it came from. No one, no prints, no rustling. I waited, listened, eventually went back down. 5 minutes later, I saw it, my flashlight, sitting upright on a log maybe 6 feet from my tent, clean, centered, like it had been placed with purpose. But I hadn't moved it. I know I hadn't touched it. I even checked. The stove was where I'd left it. Everything else untouched. I didn't sleep well that night. The fog had thickened, pressing in from all sides. Every twig snap felt louder. I kept the flashlight clutched in my hand inside the bag, watching the outline of my tent walls flicker with passing mist and moonlight. And then, around 3 a.m., I heard the voice again. Same tone. Same distance. But this time it said, "Hey Nate, that was it. Just my name, soft, clear." I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just lay there, flashlight tight in my grip, heart pounding like I was being held underwater. It didn't say anything else. No footsteps. No rustle, just fog. At first light I packed, no breakfast, no coffee, just threw everything into the bag and started back down the ridge. I didn't want to make it a thing, not yet. Maybe someone had been out there. Maybe a prank. Maybe I'd been more exhausted than I thought. I kept telling myself that until I reached the main trail again. That's when I saw the second flashlight. Same model as mine. Same scuffs. Lying half buried in the dirt next to a downed log off the trail. I checked my pack, and mine was still there. So whose was this? I left it alone. A mile later, I passed a clearing with a half-collapsed shelter. One of those old three-sided lean-tos from the days before REI took over the mountains. I stepped inside to check for signal and found the notebook. Just a cheap spiral-bound one. Tucked into a dented cookpot. Only a few pages not ruined by rain, but enough. Night 2. Voice again. Said my name. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Still not sure how they'd know. Night 4. Flashlight moved. Twice. Left it by the creek. Found it leaning against my boots. Night 5. He said my brother's name. I haven't spoken that name aloud in years. That was the last legible line. The rest was bled through ink and mold. I kept walking. Fast. The rest of the day blurred. My legs burned. My brain kept looping that one line. He said my brother's name. Back at the trailhead, I sat in my car for almost half an hour before starting the engine. I told myself I wouldn't talk about it. That it was stress, sleep deprivation, nerves. But a week later, I found myself researching disappearances near Roan. There weren't many, not officially. A few lost hikers, an overdue camper here and there. But one name stood out. Daniel Henson. Went missing in 2013, mid-30s. Liked to solo hike. Last known location, Roan High Bluff. In the local forum, someone mentioned he'd told a coworker he was going off-grid for a bit. Clear the head. That same coworker said something else in a buried comment. He told me he used to go to this one ridge, said he liked the fog up there, said it felt like it listened. I kept scrolling. Someone replied, "My brother heard a voice in that area once too, whispered his name from the trees." He thought it was me. I wasn't there. I stopped reading after that. I've camped since then, but not in that part of the Appalachians, not anywhere near Roan, and I don't hike alone anymore. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd answered that voice, if I'd gone toward it. Sometimes I think it was testing me, seeing how close I'd come to stepping off the path, and sometimes on foggy mornings I'll find my flashlight not where I left it. Upright, neat, clean, waiting. It was supposed to be just a weekend escape. Nothing serious. Me, Dylan, and Mason, old college roommates, meeting up again after 2 years of adult life pulling us in different directions. We picked a spot halfway between us in the Blue Ridge stretch, near Whitaker Hollow, not far from the Virginia-North Carolina border. There wasn't much there, just a gravel turnout and a half-erased forestry trail that dipped into a basin full of wet leaves, twisted roots, and the kind of silence you feel in your ribs. We hiked in a couple miles, found a clearing tucked between 3 ridge shoulders, and pitched camp just before dusk. The light hung low by then, thick with fog that never seemed to move, like it was nailed between the trees. Everything was damp. Our boots, the firewood, even our clothes from brushing against moss-slick branches. Still, the fire started. Dylan had always been the one to figure things out. Mason unpacked his portable grill and started frying up some sausage. The smell helped. It grounded the night. We ate, laughed, talked about people we used to know, jobs we didn't love, plans we'd half forgotten. Just guys trying to remember what being young together felt like. Sometime after 2 a.m., the fire died. Not slowly. Not like it faded or sputtered out. One moment we were talking, and in the next it was gone. No glow, no smoke. No heat. Just cold ash in a perfect ring, like someone had poured a bucket of water on it without a sound. We looked at each other. No wind, no rain, no logs falling out of place. Mason lit it again. Same setup, same dry paper. It flared, caught, and started up. 5 minutes later, it was out again. No smoke. No hiss, just off. He tried again. This time it barely lasted 3 minutes. Dylan chuckled, but it didn't sound real. All right. Nature wins, so we left it, sat in the dark, and that's when the smell started. Faint at first, like iron old metal, the kind you smell on your fingers after handling corroded tools, but layered with something else. Wet fur, maybe. Or sweat that had soaked into wool and never dried. It came in waves, moving. We sat up, still not speaking. The woods around us were quiet, but not empty. Then came the first crunch, leaves to the left, then another. Right behind us, then 2 more. From the front and far right, all slow, all deliberate, coming from different directions, like something circling, or worse, several somethings. We turned our lights on. Nothing, just fog and trees and the faint glint of frost starting to form on the tent fabric, but the smell got stronger. Remember the way Dylan's breath fogged in front of his face? How it shook just slightly, Mason whispered. It's not animals. We all knew that. Animals don't move like that, and they don't put out fires. No one slept. We sat in a triangle, backs to the cold earth, knees pulled in, flashlights aimed outward, but never far enough to pierce the fog. Every few minutes we'd hear another crunch, a slow shift of leaves, a snap of wet bark. Never running, never retreating, just pacing. I tried to time it, tried to figure out if it was one thing walking in a circle or multiple, but the pattern didn't make sense. Sometimes a sound came from 2 places at once. Sometimes from behind a tree I'd just scanned. Once, I swore I saw a figure, tall, hunched, shift between trunks 30 feet away, but when I blinked it was just shadow and fog. Just after 4 a.m. the smell changed. Sweeter, almost like burnt sugar, but wrong, like something trying to smell pleasant and missing the mark. That's when Mason stood up slowly and said, "I think we're not supposed to be here." His voice didn't carry. Even our words felt muffled. He stepped toward the edge of the clearing, flashlight beam shaking in his hand. "I just want to see something." Dylan reached out to stop him, but didn't. Mason took 4 steps forward, then froze. "Guys," he whispered. "Come look." We joined him. There, just beyond the edge of the clearing, was a circle, darker earth. Dry leaves swept aside, and in the center, a pile of ash, still warm. Not from our fire. This was deeper in the woods, a good 30 yards from camp. No sign of rocks. No logs, just a flat patch and a burned-out spot. We looked around and saw another, then a third. Each the same size, same shape, like someone had built 3 separate fires recently, and then cleared the signs. But here's the part I can't shake. In the center of the third, one against where the ash was thinnest, there was a single footprint, bare long toes pressed, deep into the soil but not walking in, just standing, like something had been waiting. Mason turned to say something, I think, but his light went out, just blinked off, then Dylan's, then mine all at once, no click, no drain. Just darkness, and then the crunching returned all around us, closer. I remember feeling my ribs tighten, like my body wanted to fold in on itself. None of us spoke. None of us ran, we just stood there, too afraid to move. After what felt like an hour, the sounds faded, the smell thinned, and the fog broke. By dawn, we could see again. The fire circle, gone, no ash, no footprint. Just leaves scattered like nothing had ever touched them. We packed in silence, didn't eat. Didn't drink, didn't speak until we hit the road. Mason never came to the next trip we planned. He doesn't reply much these days. Dylan won't talk about that night, not even when we're drunk. Me? I still go camping, still chase that quiet, but I bring backup batteries. I never let the fire die, and sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, I catch that same smell again. Old iron, wet fur, and if I listen closely enough, crunching from more than one direction. There were 2 of us on that trail, me and Mark, friends since middle school, now in our 30s, both a little too worn down by city life and looking for something that might feel like peace. We'd done hikes before, but this one was different, steeper, higher. The kind of trail where your ears pop and the fog moves faster than your breath. Raven Cliff had been on our list for a while. People said the views were worth it if you got high enough before the sun dipped. We weren't in a rush, just wanted to get away from the hum of work, phones, the pressure to always be somewhere else. We reached the ridge just before dark, a small clearing above a rocky ledge, trees leaning like they'd grown tired of holding themselves up. We pitched the tent on a patch of packed earth that felt too dry for the time of year. The rest of the forest was wet, the air thick with dew, but the spot itself felt oddly untouched. No prints, no mushy moss, just a smooth, level patch like it had been scraped clean. Still, it was flat and quiet, so we stayed. Dinner was canned chili and off-brand trail mix. The wind picked up after dusk, cold air brushing the tent from the west, but no rain. Just that soft hiss of branches shifting and the occasional owl somewhere down in the hollow. We turned in just after 11. I remember zipping the tent shut and checking the forecast one last time. Clear skies. No storms. Then came the coughing. It hit sometime after midnight. Deep. Wet. Violent. Not like someone clearing their throat. This was full-body retching. The kind of cough that sounds like it comes from a collapsed lung, like someone trying to breathe through mud. It was right outside the tent. Inches from the fabric, we both shot up. Mark clicked his headlamp on but didn't unzip anything. I yelled out, "Hey! You all right out there?" The coughing stopped instantly, no shuffle, no reply. Just silence. We waited. Nothing. Mark whispered, "Could be someone sick, or messing with us," but we both knew. There hadn't been any other campers that high up. We hadn't passed a soul since early afternoon. Still, we waited another half hour, ears sharp, the tent suddenly too small, too thin. Nothing came. No footsteps. No more coughing. Eventually, we laid back down. I didn't sleep. Mark might have drifted off. Hard to tell. By morning, the fog had lifted and everything looked dull and pale, like the color had drained from the woods overnight. The air was still, colder than it should have been. Our breath showed in the sunlight, and that's when we saw them. Handprints, all along the outside of the tent. Long smears of mud. Palms, fingers, dragging lines. Not just one, at least a dozen. Some high near the top, some low, almost like knees had pressed in too. But here's the thing that stuck with me. The ground was dry. Bone dry. Not just beneath the tent, but the whole clearing. There was no mud, no water, no prints leading in. Or out, we packed fast. No coffee, no breakfast. Just broke camp in silence and didn't say much until we were halfway down the trail. Mark finally said, "There's no way those were ours." I didn't answer. He was right. We'd gone to sleep before dark, hadn't stepped outside once during the night. And even if we had, the ground wasn't wet enough to leave that kind of residue. We dropped down about 600 feet in elevation, reaching the lower tree line where fog still hung heavy between the trunks. I kept thinking about the coughing, how it had sounded wet but hollow, like it had no lungs behind it. No voice, just noise. We didn't make camp again. Ended up staying in a roadside motel in Clayton, one of those with flickering ice machines and towels that smell like old coins. That night, I noticed Mark staring at his forearm. Not like something hurt, just staring. Eventually, he said, "You think it was someone sick? Like actually sick?" I didn't know how to respond. The next morning, he was gone. Not missing gone. Just gone. Left before dawn. Didn't text. Didn't answer calls for 3 days. When he finally messaged, all he said was, "Don't go back up there. I haven't heard much from him since." He deleted all his socials a few months later. I kept the tent packed away for a while after that. Couldn't bring myself to set it up again, even in the backyard. But the memory didn't fade. In fact, it got sharper, because about a month after that trip, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A post on a hiking forum. Some guy describing a cough he heard outside his shelter near the Appalachian. Trailhead past Raven Cliff said it sounded like someone was drowning on air. Another user replied with a photo of their tent, smeared handprints. No mud in sight. I didn't comment. Didn't save the thread. But I kept thinking about it. Eventually, I went back. Alone. I told myself it was for closure. That I needed to prove the mind fills in blanks when it's afraid. That maybe it had been condensation or a prank or something we'd overlooked. I made it up to the ridge by late afternoon. Same clearing, same weirdly dry patch of earth. No sounds, no footprints, no cough. I stayed just long enough to snap a photo, then turned to go. As I was walking back toward the main trail, I heard something that made me stop cold. Thump. Not a fall, not a branch, like something heavy had been dropped onto the ground just out of sight. I stood there a full minute, breath shallow, muscles locked. Didn't go look. Didn't call out. Just turned and walked faster than I meant to, not stopping until the car was in sight. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that cough. I'll be lying in bed, the house dead quiet, and it'll echo faintly through the drywall, deep, ragged. What I tell myself, it's memory, stress. But every time I hear it, I check the back door. And once, just once, I found a streak of muddy fingerprints on the outside of the glass. It hadn't rained in weeks. It was early October when I took the trip. No real plan. Just needed to get away from Asheville, from the screens, the routines, the noise of trying to be okay when I wasn't. I picked a lesser-known loop trail near Cello Knob, something high enough to breathe different air, something with less foot traffic. I'd gone alone before. I don't mind the solitude, sometimes I even crave it. Out there, the quiet doesn't ask anything from you. It just exists. It had rained the night before, so everything was damp. The trail was soft with rot, and the air hung heavy with that deep forest smell. Wet bark, moss, something faintly metallic from the runoff. Every step sent up the scent of mud and pine needles. I was about 7 miles in when I noticed the light, a soft orange glow, off trail and maybe a few hundred yards upslope just beyond the tree line. At first, I figured it was another hiker, someone with a fire or maybe a lantern. But something about it felt still, not flickering, not moving with the trees. Just sitting there, I changed course, climbed the ridge toward it, keeping my steps careful. The brush thickened quickly. Patches of blackberry bramble, low-hanging limbs with beads of water that soaked my sleeves. But the light never changed, never grew closer or dimmed behind the branches. I kept walking. 10 minutes. Then 20. Compass said I'd veered nearly half a mile off trail. Still, the glow stayed put. Same color, same shape. Like it was waiting. Eventually, I broke through a curtain of spruce and stepped into a clearing. The light was gone. No fire. No lantern glow, just wet silence. The clearing was maybe 20 feet wide, framed by trees bowed under their own weight. The air felt colder here. Centered in the clearing was a collapsed tent, old, mildewed, and buckled in on itself. The poles had snapped in two places. One corner was buried under a thick blanket of wet leaves. Beside it, sitting perfectly upright, was a rusted metal lantern. The kind with a glass globe and a tiny wick inside. The glass was streaked with grime, but intact. I bent down and looked. The wick was black, burned, but long cold. I didn't touch it. Then I noticed the sleeping bag, half buried under the leaves. Ripped along one side like it had been snagged on something. The zipper still worked, but what unsettled me most, it was zipped from the inside. I stood there a long while trying to make sense of it. No signs of people, no gear, no trash, no footprints, no reason that lantern should have been glowing. By the time I forced myself to leave, dusk was rolling in. The trees whispered with wind. The glow never returned. But that night, camped alone 2 miles downhill, I could still smell the faint tang of kerosene on my hands, even though I never lit a thing. I didn't hike the loop. Cut the trip short by a day and retraced my steps back to the car. My boots were soaked and I couldn't shake that image. The tent, the lantern, the way the glow had stayed fixed like it was tethered to that spot. Back in town, I didn't mention it to anyone. What would I even say? A few weeks passed. Leaves turned. Snow hit the ridgelines early. And then on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, I found myself at the public library, half out of boredom, half out of something I didn't have words for yet. I searched through old hiking reports, ranger station logs, even old news clippings from Mitchell County. Nothing recent. But in the archives, I found a folder with scanned incident reports from the 1990s, handwritten and full of faded typewriter ink. One entry stood out. October 1994. Solo hiker. Male, mid-30s, reported missing near the south slope of Cello Knob. Last seen entering the trailhead at Boland's Creek. Gear log listed, canvas tent, Coleman lantern, down sleeping bag. The ranger's note at the bottom chilled me. Site discovered with tent collapsed. Lantern found standing upright. Sleeping bag zipped from interior. No blood, no body, no signs of struggle. Weather dry at time of search, same ridge, same setup. They never found the man. The report ended with a line that made my throat tighten. Light was visible from tree line by first search team, but extinguished before entry to clearing. I went home and didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, but because it felt unfinished. Like I'd seen something that hadn't moved in years and somehow unsettled it. A week later, I drove back out. Didn't bring a pack. Just boots, flashlight, and a map. I wasn't planning on staying, just wanted to see if it was still there. The trail looked the same, though the cold had stripped the trees bare. Fog gathered lower now, around the ankles like it was watching from the ground. It took longer to find the ridge again, longer still to push through the trees. When I reached the clearing, it was empty. No tent, no lantern, just a depression in the soil where something heavy had sat for a long time. I turned to leave. That's when I noticed the marks on a nearby tree, faint lines in the bark, like someone had scraped it with a blade, 6 vertical lines, each about a foot apart. Below them, a patch of disturbed leaves. I stepped closer and saw what looked like a boot print. Not recent, and the edges had softened, but still visible, and just past that, caught under a root like it had been dropped in a hurry, was a wick black, twisted, burned. I didn't bring it home. Just stared at it for a while, then walked out without looking back. I don't hike anymore, not like I used to. Sometimes, when I'm driving back roads through Mitchell County late at night, I'll see an orange glow through the trees, always in the same spot. Never moving, I don't stop. Not anymore. I'm not the superstitious type. I grew up around these woods. My uncle owned a place near Richwood, and I spent more weekends than I can count hiking ridgelines and sleeping under tarps before I could drive. So when I say the clifftop basin was off, I don't mean that in a ghost story way. I mean the ground felt wrong. It started simple. Just a weekend trip. Me, Evan, and Richie, friends since high school. We parked off a logging access road just south of Clifftop, followed an old trailhead that looked half swallowed by pine needles, and pushed in about 3 miles before finding a good spot to camp. The clearing was in a natural bowl, quiet, low-lying, and damp. It had that fog-holding quality where sound doesn't travel and light seems bruised at the edges. Perfect if you wanted privacy. There was only one trail in, just one. It bent between 2 leaning poplars packed flat with old boot tracks and deer prints. We all saw it. We even joked about it. Richie said it looked like something a Park Service map would call unmaintained. We set up camp close to a split sycamore with a mossy base and watched the mist roll in just before dark. Dinner was instant rice and jerky. Fire barely held in the damp air. It rained around midnight. Not hard, just steady enough to drum the tent. Next morning, I crawled out early to pee and froze halfway out of the tent. The trail was gone. Not overgrown. Not obscured. Just gone, no worn path. No break in the brush. The space where it should have curved out of the basin was now a solid wall of trees. Young growth, too. Saplings thick enough to make passage hellish. I checked the compass on my pack. North still pointed north. We all stood there staring at it for a long time. Richie kept saying, "It was right there." Like we didn't know. We thought maybe we'd misremembered the direction. So we split up, marked our camp with colored bandanas, and took separate lines through the woods. Just to find something. A trail, a road, a landmark. Every direction we pushed for 20, maybe 30 minutes. We called out. We whistled. Every time we came back to the same spot, and every time we passed the same tree, a tall, rotted pine with a split trunk and halfway up, nailed into the bark, and a rusted, broken horseshoe, bent open like a jaw, dripping something. It was too thick for sap. Too dark, we didn't touch it. Just noted it, passed it again and again like a checkpoint we never meant to circle. We made camp again that night, not because we wanted to, but because we had no choice. The woods were too dense to keep going after dark. That night, the fog was thicker. The fire wouldn't catch, and sometime after midnight, we all heard the same thing. A loud crack, like a branch being snapped just beyond the tents. Then silence. Evan whispered, "We didn't leave anything out, right?" None of us answered. The next morning, it was colder, cloudier. The air felt like wet cloth. I checked the GPS again, no signal. Compass hadn't changed, but everything else felt turned, like we'd walked into a mirror of the place we started from. We ate in silence. Just jerky and cold granola. Richie was quiet, sitting against a log, staring off. "We should cut north again," I said. "If we move in one direction long enough, we'll hit something." Road, stream, anything, we packed quickly, marked the sycamore with a strip of tarp, made a note of the horseshoe tree. Set out in a clean northern line. I carved notches into bark every 100 feet with my knife. The terrain got harder, brambles thick like barbed wire. Deadfall layered 3-deep mud that sucked at our boots. 2 hours in, we passed the horseshoe tree again. Same bent iron, same wet drip. Richie threw up behind a stump. We didn't speak. Just turned and walked again, this time west. Same result. It was Evan who noticed the change first. The sound, the woods had gone completely quiet. No birds. No wind. Even our footsteps felt muted. And the air smelled different now, like rust and stagnant water. When we came around the same bend again, there was something new. At the base of the horseshoe tree, where the sap, or whatever it was, had pooled into a black stain on the roots, someone had stacked small stones into a spiral. Deliberate, fresh. Not ours, no footprints, no sign of anyone, just the stones. We didn't stay long after that. Back at the clearing, Richie packed without speaking. Said he'd rather risk moving through the undergrowth all night than see that tree again. We left the basin before dusk. Just shoved through brush until our arms bled. The woods thinned eventually. The fog lifted, and then, just like that, we found ourselves back on the trail. The original trail. The one with the boot prints and deer tracks, wide open, like it had never disappeared. We didn't celebrate, didn't speak. Just hiked hard until we reached the gravel road and piled into the car. A week later, Richie stopped answering texts. I heard he moved to Indiana. Won't hike anymore. Won't go near tree cover. Evan doesn't like to talk about it either. Says we just got lost. That fog plays tricks, but I remember what I saw and what I still see. Because every now and then, when I take back roads through the mountains, I'll see a tree just off the shoulder, Split trunk, bent horseshoe, dripping something dark, and I drive a little faster. It had been years since I'd camped solo. Not since my early 20s when I thought getting lost in the woods was something poetic. But after the breakup and everything that came with it, I needed out. Out of town. Out of my head. I chose a spot near an old fire lookout tower in western North Carolina. Supposedly built in the 50s, decommissioned sometime in the 80s. I found it listed on an old hiking forum, tucked past an unmarked service trail above Jackson County, not far from the Blue Ridge Parkway. Most maps didn't even show the trail anymore. I started the hike late morning. The trail was mostly intact but clearly forgotten. Erosion had clawed through the switchbacks. Dead leaves carpeted the ridgeline, slick from fog that hadn't burned off even by noon. There were no signs, no other hikers. Just trees breathing and creaking with age. I reached the tower around 4 p.m. The structure stood maybe 40 feet tall. Rusted steel skeleton. Weather-beaten steps. The cab at the top still had its windows, most cracked, one missing entirely. The trapdoor at the top was chained shut. I didn't climb it. Instead, I set up camp about 40 yards downslope. Close enough to see the tower, but far enough not to feel watched by it. There was no service. No bars. Just the comfort of silence and the smell of wet pine and wood smoke. I boiled water for instant coffee, warmed a packet of noodles over the fire, and watched the light slip behind the trees. It rained for a while after dark. Light but persistent. The kind that taps against the tent like fingernails. I went to sleep early. That part I remember clearly. I didn't touch my phone again after checking for signal. It stayed zipped in the side pouch of my bag. Face down. I only woke once, sometime around 2 a.m., not from a sound. Not really. But from a feeling. Like I wasn't the only one breathing under that thin layer of nylon. I stayed still. Listened. Heard nothing but the soft drip of rain from branches overhead. Eventually, I drifted back off. I woke at first light. Sore from the slope I hadn't noticed beneath my tent. The fog hung low and heavy, swallowing the top of the tower. I packed slowly, took my time making coffee again, and sat by the cold remains of the fire. It wasn't until I reached for my phone to check the time that I noticed the screen 23 new photos. The notification sat on the lock screen. Like a gut punch, I didn't open them right away. My hand hesitated. The signal bar still read no service. I unlocked the phone. Opened the gallery. Every image was in grainy green. Night vision. Every image was of me, sleeping. The first photo showed me from a distance, through the tent screen curled on my side in my sleeping bag. The next was closer, then closer still. Different angles, above. Oh, straight on. At least 3 or 4 of them were taken from inside the tent. My mouth went dry. I scrolled faster. Photo 16 showed my hand exposed outside the bag, palm up. The camera must have been inches from my fingers. Photo 17 was from the foot of the tent. Photo 18, right above my face. Each one captured with that same eerie green hue, like from a cheap trail cam or military-grade night mode. I didn't own a night vision camera. I didn't take these. My phone didn't have a setting for this. I kept scrolling. Photos 20 and 21 were pointed toward the tree line, nothing clear, just shadow shapes. Photo 22 was pointed up, toward the tower. At first, I thought it was just fog, but in the top right corner, backlit by the faintest moonlight, there was a figure, standing on top of the tower, still, watching. Its arms hung lower than they should have. The legs too thin, its posture was wrong, like it wasn't used to standing upright but had learned how. No face visible, just shape. The final photo, number 23, was blank. Pure black, but it had a timestamp at 12 a.m. I left the camp gear, left everything but my bag and water. Didn't even check to see if the chain on the tower's trapdoor was still locked. Didn't want to know. I made it back to the car by mid-afternoon, legs shaking the whole time. Drove 3 hours to Asheville in silence. Didn't turn on music. Didn't look at the photos again. Back home, I went to upload them to my laptop, but they were gone. All of them. Every image. Only the last one remained. The black screen. I still have it. I don't know why. Maybe as proof that something was there. even if I can't see it anymore. Sometimes I hear people talk about how peaceful the mountains are, how healing, and they're not wrong. But there are parts of these woods that don't want to be remembered, places that notice when you see them, places that don't like to be watched. I try not to think about what the phone didn't capture, about what might have stood just outside the frame, and I haven't camped alone since.